After 11 o'clock, so if we could get everybody back in this direction. Riley, why don't you start passing these out and make sure that we have one per family on the notebooks. Hey, Abby, come on up here and help pass out some notepads. Yeah, why don't you do all those? Yeah, those small ones. My granddaughters are going to be passing out some notepads. We'd like to make sure that every family, we have one per family, we want to make sure that every family got a notepad. So, Abby, you take care of the left side. You folks come right on in. Sometimes to get people to come back in, I sing to them. You mean they don't run back down? Yeah. No, they come in real quick because they know I'm fixing to sing. My wife and I were big fans of Barry Manilow, not his lifestyle, but his songs. And his song, I Can't Smile Without You. I can't smile without you. Can't smile without you. If you only knew what I'm going through. Can you believe, Abby, your grandpa is singing in public? She just rolled her eyes. We want to make sure everybody gets a notepad. We want one per family for every family. Down at the bottom, you'll notice the website is mentioned, the Widowhood Workshop website. We certainly encourage you to visit that. Since school has gotten started back, I thought I'd share some of these with you. These are excuses that kids have given their teachers for not getting their homework assignment turned in. Are there any of you who are teachers here or retired teachers? Okay, you can probably relate to some of this. Okay, one little boy said, I did my homework, but when the Martians came, they sucked all the ink off my paper. Another one said, a tornado sucked my homework right out of my mom's car. Another one said, I don't have my homework because my teeth itch. Another one said, my mom did it wrong, so I threw it out the bus window. Oh. And here's another one. I couldn't do my homework because my room is haunted. Here's another one. I didn't have time to do my homework because we had a new dishwasher installed. I like this one. Some boy said, my gator peed on my homework, so I didn't bring it in. Here's another kid said, my dad forgot to do my homework. Another one said, it slipped out of my hands and blew away. That's also why I'm late to school. I was chasing it. Art Linkletter made a lot of money about, sitting and talking to kids, the amazing things that they can say. Have you ever noticed that kids don't have a filter between their brain and their lips? And stuff just kind of comes out. Sometimes I kind of have that issue in my own life. Okay, I want to give you a little bit of an explanation here of how this work was birthed, give you a little introduction to widowhood generally, and then talk about God's perspective about widowhood. My wife was born in September of 1952 in Dover, Ohio, and that baby became my wife. We were married for 41 years, and we were blessed with a lot of great years in those 41 years. We were blessed with 3 daughters, thus my overexposure to the female gender issue. They were raised right. Over there on the right-hand side, those 3 T-shirts say, God first, family, then the Buckeyes, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Tim can relate to that, the preacher here, Tim Dooley. We also were blessed with 5 grandchildren. This was a picture taken where my wife is buried. And those 5 grandchildren, I'm just so glad that she was able to experience some time with those grandchildren before she passed away. Can you imagine laying in a hospital bed and not having the ability to raise your arms to touch your grandchild or hug your grandchild? My wife was afflicted with Parkinson's disease. She was diagnosed in her early 50s, and she was afflicted for 8.5 years with that disease. Parkinson's disease typically does not kill people, but it did her. She was a unique case. The doctor said in July, before she passed away in December, that what was going to happen was the Parkinson's disease was going to continue to make its way northward in her body, was eventually going to get to her respiratory system, and she was going to quit breathing. And that's exactly what happened. On December 25, 9:40 in the morning, the year was 2013, she passed away. When she passed away, my oldest daughter, Michelle, who now lives in Middle Tennessee, was on her left side and I was on her right side. And that experience was, in a word, dramatic. Some of you can relate to that. Some of you were cheated in regard to the fact that life did not give you the opportunity to say your goodbyes. Maybe you weren't even with them when they passed away. And that's a very difficult death and loss to experience. It's also difficult when you struggle with an illness for years and you are able to say your goodbyes. Loss is hard no matter how it happens and the details involved. It's just hard. And the reason why it's hard is because you've treasured that person. You've treasured your life with that person. And to lose that person in your life because you've treasured them causes you to be crushed. You know, you're just heart crushed. It's a dramatic and traumatic time in our lives. About 3 weeks after she passed away, I was sitting in my home about an hour south of Cleveland, Ohio, in an empty house. I was the only one there, and I spontaneously said something, and I have never experienced this before I did this and never experienced it since. I just spontaneously blurted something out. Kind of like the kid that doesn't have the filter between the brain and the lips, and it just came out. And I said it out loud. I said, "What's wrong with me?" I was a mess. I was really struggling. But I was a Christian. I'd been a Christian since I was 16 years old. I'm now 61 at this point in time. I'm a preacher. I'm not supposed to be a mess. I have been with these people pre-loss, at loss, post-loss for years. I'd been with the same church at that point for 32 years. I'd been with them when they'd experienced those losses. I heard those cries. I saw those tears. I participated in those hugs. I also cried with them. Why was I such a mess? That's when I decided to get on the internet, where you can find everything, and start looking for help for those who are widowed. And you know what I found? Virtually nothing. And I said right then, somebody ought to do something, because this ain't right. See, I was beginning to experience something I'd never experienced before in my life. Something that I was ignorant about. Now, I was not ignorant about loss, because I was with those people pre-loss and at loss. And what I knew was when you lose somebody, especially when you lose a spouse, it is painful. It is indescribably painful. I knew about loss. What I was clueless about was life after loss. You think loss is hard? Do the life after loss. It's way harder. Because you've got to deal with the after loss every day and every night. You've got to deal with the absence of that person that was your first priority. I had a widow lady who just recently turned 60 tell me, she said, I'm nobody's first priority. I'd never thought about that before. She said, my daughter is married and has a husband and has children. My son is married, has a job, and has children. I have a daughter in a faraway state. She has a boyfriend. I'm not their first priority, and I shouldn't be. They have their own lives. When you have to start dealing with life after loss, you begin to struggle with things that you never imagined before. And it does a number on you. And you do begin to question yourself, your sanity, your faith. You also begin to question your friends. You know what we often do with widowed people? Is we keep distant from them. The first most shocking thing I read when I started passionately reading everything I could get my hands on about widowhood, the first thing I read that I didn't believe, I read everything I believed until I ran across this statistic. And then I found it a second place and did a little research and found out it's true. Generally speaking, when a widowed person loses their spouse, they lose 75% of their friendship network. You know why that is? They don't know what to do with you. Imagine this. This was a divorced person I was talking to just a few days ago. She's living alone. She's gone through loss of marriage by divorce. A close friend of hers, her closest friend, said that she'd love to be able to invite her over to her home with a couple of other couples, but she would make the group an odd number. And so she wouldn't invite her over to eat with a couple of other couples. We have got to open our minds and open our hearts and clean out our ears and learn something about dealing with life after loss. If we keep going with our inexperience and our ignorance, people are going to continue to be neglected, and people are going to continue to be hurt because of our ignorance and our inexperience. So I started this widowhood workshop ministry. I sold my children, 3 daughters and 2 sons-in-law and 5 grandchildren, on helping me with this ministry, and we call it our Family Passion Project. I want to share with you some things that you might find interesting. What we're going to talk about here is widowhood, and we're first of all going to share with you some information that I'm sure you're going to find interesting, and I'm sure you don't know this. I never knew all this until I started doing the research. We're a minority, about 6% of the population generally, but look here, 1/3 of the population when you look at the 65 years and older group. Now watch about some of these other numbers. In our country, 65 years and up, 37% of the women in that age group are widowed. Do you know what the average age of a woman in our country is when she's first widowed? Now, you stop and think about what decade would you imagine most people losing their spouse? Give me a decade in life where you would expect a lot of people losing their spouse. Anybody? 70s, 50s? You think up in the 80s there'd be a bunch? If you get to the 90s, you think there'd be a bunch? The average age of a woman when she's first widowed in our country is 57. Now, to drive that number down that low, when there's a boatload of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s losing their mates, To drive that number down to 57%, the average, you've got to have a lot of people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s losing their mates to drive that number down to 57. Women, 75%. 75% of the women in our country are going to experience widowhood. 75%. You think we need to talk about this? Think we need to study about this? It's a very important subject because there are people that are being neglected and some people being hurt because of our inexperience and our ignorance. You drop that number down to 55, almost a third of the women, 55 and up, are widowed, but notice the men, the small number. In comparison, 9. There are 4 to 5 times more widowed females than there are widowed males. That's the fault of both the men and the women. Okay, let me explain to you why there's so many more widowed females than males. Partly it's the male gender's fault. We treat you women so good that you live longer. Your lifespan, the lifespan of a woman, is longer. Now, the second issue that lends itself to having a bunch of women who are widowed is women statistically have a tendency, the majority of women, marry older men. If women are marrying older men, and us guys keep treating you like princesses, like royalty, and you keep living longer, see what that's going to create is a lot of widowed females, not nearly as many widowed males. Look at this. Total number of widowed people in the United States. A 2015 census report, 20 million. 20 million. Every year, over 1 million people are forced to deal with the loss of their spouse because that's what life gifted them. What is this? What's it look like? A present, a gift, okay? Now, have you ever, raise your hand if you've ever been given a gift you didn't want. All of you, okay. Now you men don't know about this. I'll just talk to the women. Just, guys, keep your ears open. Okay, women, what do you do when you're given a gift that you don't want? Okay, re-gift it. Okay, re-gift it. Okay, what else are you going to do? What? Act like you like it, okay. After you act like you like it, what are you going to do with it? Put it in the closet. When you put it in the closet, what do you think about it? Nothing. It's just stuck in the closet. As a matter of fact, I see some of you that are young enough, I'll bet you've got some wedding gifts stored in your closet or in your attic that you've never, ever used. Sometimes in life you get gifts you didn't want. And so we do something with it. Okay, now, if you've lost your spouse, you've been gifted something. What life gave you is loss. What are you going to do with it? Can you stick it in the closet and forget about it? Nope, it's not an option. Okay? Are you going to put it out in your garage sale and sell it? You want to sell loss to somebody else? You want to re-gift it? See, you're stuck with something you didn't want, and you got to deal with it. I don't like that. I don't think anybody likes that. So what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to deal with it. Boy, that's a harsh reality. I don't like that. But that's a harsh reality. Sometimes life gifts you a disease. In my wife's case, Parkinson's disease. In some people's cases, it could be Alzheimer's. It could be Lou Gehrig's disease. What are you going to do with that? Sometimes life gifts you an amputation. I know a fellow who got his hand stuck in a machine in a rubber factory in Akron, Ohio. He had to deal with the loss of his limb the rest of his life. He didn't ask for that. He didn't want it, but he had to deal with it. Sometimes life gifts you things you don't want, and what we have to do is learn to deal with them. Deal with them in a way that will glorify God if we're Christians. But that's hard. We have three things that we're going to give out right now. Riley, come up here. What happened to Emma? Okay, Riley, you take that one. And then Emma, Abby, you take this one. Okay, we're going to give these two pot holders. My granddaughters make pot holders, and we're going to gift these out. I suspicion Troy is in the running for one of these. I visited with Troy earlier. Troy, how young were you when you lost your first wife? 34, okay. Can anybody beat that number? Ashley? 35. Ashley, 35. 34. So 34 and... Okay. Can anybody beat those numbers? Did anybody lose their spouse earlier than that? Okay, girls, give them the pot holders. Troy, do you need help about directions about how to use a pot holder? Okay. Okay. And it happens to some people very early in life. And how do you deal with that? We're going to talk about what that's like in that third session. Okay, let's look at some more. 78% of the widowed are women. 78%. Most research on widowhood has focused on women, understandably, for this reason. Widows outnumber widowers by nearly 5 to 1. It's estimated that half of all marriages end with the death of the husband. 1/5 end with the death of the wife. In the world, there are nearly 250 million widows. This was a research done. Sherry Blair, you may remember Tony Blair of the UK. This was his wife. Of the 245 million women who are widowed in this world, 115 million of them live in abject poverty. One of the things that we're doing with the Widowhood Workshop Ministry is we're branching out and not just helping churches start local ongoing widowhood ministries, but we've also started working with Joseph Ishan, who is a minister in Ghana, and we are helping him start a widowhood ministry in Ghana. Just recently, about a month ago, he baptized the first widow in his local ministry group. With our missionary works that we're doing, are we encouraging our missionaries to minister to the widowed? In India and China, they have more widowed people than anybody else. They blow us out of the water. They have over twice as many widows in those countries as we do. Over 40 million in China, that's the number one country. Over 40 million in India as well. Are we ministering throughout the world to these people who've gone through this heart-crushing loss? Now, if you look at how God perceives this, and you look at how God describes him relative to the widowed, when you look at those three, I just selected three, when you look at those three, what does that tell you about God and the widowed? Defender, protector, and reliever. What does that tell you about God and the widowed? Anybody? He's there to take care of them, okay? Anybody else? He loves them. When you love somebody, when you have compassion, and they're in a uniquely difficult life circumstance, what do? You don't just feel. What else do? You act, you help. How does God do that? How does God protect, defend, and relieve the widowed? okay. Have some of you ever sung that song about he has no hands but our hands to do his work today? He has no feet but our feet. How does God do his best work sometimes? Through us. Through us. Are we doing that with these people who are going through this extremely difficult life circumstance? They've not just lost their spouse. They're having to live with that every single day. Every day, every night. I'm convinced the two hardest places for a widowed person to go, the two hardest places for a widowed person to go is, number one, to bed. You know, I know some widowed people who, after the loss of their spouse, slept on the couch for months and months because they couldn't go back to bed. How many people at church know that? The second difficult place for a widowed person to go is right here, church. Some of the stories that I've heard from widowed people about their attempts to come back to church will bring tears to your eyes. You know what really cuts to my heart is when I'm preaching or teaching and I see in a public assembly, in a class or in worship, and I see somebody who's widowed sitting by themselves. Why in the world would that be? When I was in Mission, Texas, and did a widowhood workshop there was a young couple there, a young adult couple there, no children. They had a ministry that I thought was I was so impressed with them. They said what they do on Sunday morning when they come in is they hunt, they stalk. They stalk the crowd, and they find a widowed person, and they ask them, can we sit with you today? Isn't that neat? Widowed people in the public assembly of the Lord shouldn't be sitting by themselves. There should be people sitting with them. You know, it's really neat when you have somebody who shows that kind of interest in you. Can I come and sit with you? Can we come and sit with you? Especially if you got kids. Because kids can really help. They really, really can help. God does his best work through his people. But if we're inexperienced in regard to this and we don't know anything about it, we're not going to do his work effectively. You look at some of the things that are mentioned in the Bible, especially in the ancient setting of both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The wicked slay the widow. See, that's not just neglect, that's actual hurtful conduct toward the widowed. And then you look at this indictment made against Job by one of his friends. Job, the reason why you're suffering is because you've sinned a lot. They believed in the theory of retribution. You know, Job, you've done this and you've done that. It's so obvious that you're this terrible, gross sinner. And one of the things you've done is you've sent widows away empty. You haven't shown any concern. See their perspective? See, you just don't do that. If you're a righteous person, if you're a godly person, you don't send widows away empty, and yet we often do send them away empty. I don't know how many times I've had a widowed person tell me this at church. They have this experience where somebody comes up to them and asks them, how are you doing? And the widowed person has grown to the point where, instead of lying about it, they're more truthful. And we do lie. I mean, we try to be courteous, and we don't want to be the object of pity. Widowed people do not want to be the object of pity. Can I repeat that? Widowed people do not want to be the object of pity. But we grow to a point in our widowhood where hopefully we learn that what we ought to do to help educate people is we really respond honestly to that. I don't know how many of them have told me, that they have been asked that question, how are you doing? And they've said, well, I'm not doing well. And then the person just walks away. I mean, you have got to be kidding me. Would we be that way? Yeah, we are. I've known of elders who've done that to widowed people. I can give you the telephone number of the lady you can call to talk to confirm that she had that experience with a shepherd in her congregation. It's not an uncommon thing. Widowed people sometimes make other people uncomfortable because they don't know what to do with us. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. Hopefully you'll learn more about that in the third session. In Deuteronomy chapter 24, the Israelites, I'm not a southerner, but I'll use the term that would be used down here. The Israelites are fixing to cross the Jordan River. They're fixing to cross the Jordan, and they're going to go in and they're going to take the land of Canaan. And Moses is sharing with them some instruction before they make that big, momentous change. What's interesting to me is Moses doesn't give them military strategy about what to do when they cross the Jordan. Listen what he does tell them in Deuteronomy 24. You shall not pervert justice, do the stranger or the fatherless, nor take a widow's garment as a pledge. But you shall remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. Therefore I command you to do this thing. When you reap your harvest in your field, and you forget a sheaf in the field, you shall not go back and get it. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow, that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. When you beat your olive trees, you shall not go over the boughs again. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. When you gather the grapes of your vineyard, you shall not glean it afterward. It shall be for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. And you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt. Therefore I command you to do this thing. Instead of talking about military strategy, he says, okay, guys, this is the way it is. Here's how I want you to be, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to have compassionate hearts. I want you to care for the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. 3 classes of people often linked together in Scripture. You can get your old Cruden's Concordance out, and you can find those passages. Sometimes 2 of the 3 will be linked together. Oftentimes, all 3 of them are linked together. What is similar? What do the stranger, the fatherless, and the widow share? What is similar about those 3 life circumstances? Anybody? Don't have a good support network. Would anybody else like to suggest something? Probably alone. They are all 3 dealing with a uniquely difficult life circumstance, aren't they? All 3 of them. The stranger, the fatherless, and the widow. So what's he say? You think about people who have uniquely difficult life circumstances. You minister to them, you help them. And he says, here's how you do that. You remember when you were in Egypt and you were begging me to help you? You were dying there because of all the burdens you were bearing. And you cried out to me, and you know what? I heard you. And you know what? I not only heard you, I responded to you, and by my power, I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I showed compassion to you. Now you show compassion to others. It's compassion that will motivate us to minister to people who are struggling with very difficult life circumstances. Sadly, though, what's really pitiful is when you go to the book of Isaiah and the prophets generally, but I'll just read a section of the first chapter of the book of Isaiah. The Israelites didn't get the message very well. They didn't get that email, evidently. And they just went ahead and continued to live their high life and didn't show care and concern for others. They drifted away from the Lord's will, and God got sick and tired of them. As a matter of fact, in Isaiah chapter 1, he identifies them in verse 4 as a sinful nation, a brood of evildoers and corrupters. He compares them, he calls them out and calls them in verses 10 following Sodom and Gomorrah. These are his own people he's talking to. Then verse 12, he says, when you come and appear before me, who's required this from your hand to trample my courts? Bring no more futile sacrifices. Incense is an abomination to me. The new moons, the Sabbaths, the calling of assemblies. I cannot endure iniquity in the sacred meeting. Your new moons and your appointed feast my soul hates. They are a trouble to me. I'm weary of bearing them. When you spread out your hands, I'll hide my eyes from you. Even though you make many prayers, I will not hear. Your hands are full of blood. In other words, you get up on Sunday morning, and you come to Bible class, and you come to worship service, you sing, and you listen to the sermon. But you know what? I'm sick and tired of what you're doing. And you keep reading that chapter. And you know what? They're not living a life consistent with what they're hearing in Bible class. And they're not living a life that resembles people who worship the Lord. And the Lord said, look, I don't want to hear it anymore. I won't accept what you're doing. You can do all the honoring of these festivals and feasts you want to. You can pray all you want to. I ain't listening, and I hate what you're doing. See, sometimes what happens is we get in this rut of emphasizing the ritual, and there are rituals with religion. We never should let any ritual, biblical ritual, become empty or meaningless. But there are rituals. Sometimes what happens is we become so involved with the ritual that we forget there's much more to religion than the ritual. There's the life that we need to be living. And that life needs to be a life of love and compassion for people who are struggling with difficult life circumstances. Well, he tells them in Isaiah chapter 1, there's a solution to this. He says, wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, put away the evil of your doings, cease to do evil, learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, and plead for the widow. See, right there he nails, again, two of the three things that were mentioned in Deuteronomy 24. He says, defend the fatherless and plead for the widow. See, they were doing the rituals, but they were showing no compassion for people who were struggling with difficult life circumstances. See, that's what happened with the Jewish religion. If we're not careful, that can happen to us. We can be like that as Christians, where what we emphasize and what has pretty much become the exclusive part of our religion is the ritual. What about the life? What about the relationships? What about the ministry that we ought to be engaged in with a compassionate heart? Jesus talked about those who devour widows' houses. I'm not sure what that means. I just know it ain't good. Devour widows' houses. Obviously, they were taking advantage. Here were religious people in that Old Testament covenant. They were taking advantage of, hurting widowed people. Acts chapter 6 and verse 1. Here you've got the church, those first 6 chapters. You read about all that tremendous growth of the church. Man, it had to be exciting to be a part of all that. As a matter of fact, Brother Wayne Jackson, who's written a commentary on the book of Acts, estimates that probably at this point in Acts chapter 6, there's about 20,000 Christians in the church. 20,000. Can you imagine being we've got some shepherds here. Can you imagine being an elder in the Lord's church of 20,000? Do you know what you have when you have 20,000 Christians? You've got way more than 20,000 problems. Because you know what? You've got them, and I've got them, and everybody's got problems. So here are these 20,000 people in this city of Jerusalem, having no clue that they're going to be there as long as they were. Do you honestly think that everything ran smoothly? Well, we know it didn't. As a matter of fact, in Acts 6 and verse 1, this is the first ministry weakness that's mentioned in the first century church. They're neglecting the widowed. Now, I think that's interesting that of all, I'll guarantee you there were other ministry issues. When you have 20,000 people, there are ministry weaknesses. Everything didn't go peachy creamy. Of all the ones he could have mentioned, he mentions this one. And whenever there became an awareness of this issue, what happened? it was addressed. That's what we ought to do in the church. You know, the vast majority of churches that I'm aware of, that I go and visit with, they don't know how many widowed people they have. They don't know. I told you I was with that church for 32 years when my wife passed away. During that 32-year period, if you had come to me and asked me, how many young people, Dean, that church you preach for, how many young people are in that church? I could have answered that question real easily. You go to the church computer and you just punch a few keys and you get a list. You got a list of those kids, and when they graduate, they were a part of the youth ministry. If somebody would have come to me and said, how many widowed people do you have in that church? I couldn't have answered that question. But that third week after my wife passed away, that same night where I said, what's wrong with me? I sat down for the first time. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I continue to admit it publicly as a wake-up call. I sat down with the church directory, a pictorial church directory for the first time, with a yellow pad and a pen. And I started writing down the name of every widowed person. I was number 16. There were 12 women, and I was the fourth man. Boy, did I ever miss the boat there. Because now I was beginning to experience life after loss. And I was beginning to realize that, oh, have we ever neglected these people? We have really neglected these people. I didn't want that to be anymore. I wanted to raise awareness from that point on about widowhood, and I wanted to try to do more to help us as a brotherhood to be the people of God, the compassionate-hearted people of God, who are known as folks who care for the widowed. Imagine what would happen in this area if this church, or the church in Boonville, or the church in Fort Payne, Alabama, became known as that's the church that cares for the widowed. Imagine what a tremendous PR value there would be in that, a public relations value. Imagine how that would open minds and hearts. In the local ministry that we have in Villa Rica, Georgia now, that my daughter and a friend of hers helped to launch a couple of years ago, this past week, earlier in the week, we had 19 people who were there. 6 of the people were from the community. We have people now who are attending church with us, who are worshiping the Lord with us, because they became aware of this widowhood ministry in the Villa Rica Church. The same thing was true in Murray City, Tennessee, when I was over there after my wife passed away. About a year and a half after she passed away, I found a church that would take me. It's a little church in Murray City, Tennessee, population 650. The whole county was 14,600, bunch of cotton farmers. But they took me in. And the only thing that I stipulated was, I said, I want to share with you about the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. I want you to cut me some slack and be willing to go and visit with churches and do widowhood workshops and help churches start widowhood ministries. And I want us to start a widowhood ministry right here in Crockett County, Tennessee. And that's what we did. Myself and about 4 widowed women, we launched the first local ministry that I know of in the Brotherhood. And that grew from that little group to over 10, to over 20, to over 40, and sometimes over 50. Half of the people who were there were not members of the church. They were members of other churches. But they really had their perspective changed about the church. We had 4 baptisms during 4.5 years there with that ministry. It can happen. But we've got to become those people that God wants us to be. In this passage here, in James 1 in verse 27, about pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this: of all the things that he could have mentioned about pure and undefiled religion. Now this is a synecdoche, a part, English class, probably the day, again, you were sleeping. Synecdoche, a part standing for the whole. It's like a nutshell summary is what it is. You have the same thing in Micah 6 verse 8. He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Micah 6 verse 8, a nutshell summary. Okay, this is a nutshell summary of Christianity. Pure and undefiled religion, in whose opinion? In God's perspective. Pure and undefiled religion before God and the Father is this, to visit. Well, visit, what does that mean? That word is a common verb that means to see, to inspect. It's in the present tense in that particular passage, so it's talking about a habit or a practice. And then it's the idea of looking upon in order to help or benefit. That's what it is. In other words, you're finding out what the needs are and then you are ministering to them. You know, one of the hard things for a widowed person to respond to is the question, what can I do for you? Now, when you ask that question of a widowed person, what have you done to that widowed person? Or anybody for that matter. What can I do for you? Who's having the responsibility shifted to them? The one who's asked that question. I remember sitting with Marlon Troyer in the Cleveland Clinic one day. His wife was having treatments. And we were sitting in the snack bar. And he said, Dean, he said, I wish people would quit saying, what can I do for you? He said, I just hate it when people ask me that question. He said, I just wish they would go ahead and do what they see needs to be done. Think about that. Now, how can you know what needs to be done? Well, you need to become familiar with what that life circumstance is. You know, if it's an alcoholic, or if it's somebody who's going through the excruciating experience of a divorce they didn't want, or a person who's struggling with cancer, find out about that. Learn about that. There are ways to find out about that stuff. Then interact with them. Start looking over and inspecting. Cultivate relationships with them where you find out. I love the story about this guy who had a brother come to his house, a brother in the Lord come to his house and say, hey, I don't know what you're doing in regard to your shrubbery and your landscaping and your yard, but I just want you to know that whatever you're doing, don't do it anymore because I'm going to take care of it. No expense, I'm just going to take care of it. Whatever you've been doing, don't worry about it, I'm going to take care of that. You know what a good thing to do for somebody after they've lost a loved one and they're going to have a funeral? Have you ever thought about going and picking up their car and washing their car so they'll have a clean car the day of the funeral? You know, we typically bring food. We bring food because we know that they don't want to cook, so at least they'll have food available. But there's more to ministering to people who've suffered loss than casseroles. Let me tell you about this guy who every day, this preacher, who every day for over a year had somebody from church come to his house to help him with his wife. When his wife died, nobody has come to his house. Nobody. If you don't believe that story, I'll give you his number. You can call him. You can ask him about it. He didn't tell me that because he was whining, because I know him well. He wasn't whining. He was simply reporting to me what he had experienced. He understands. He understands about the ignorance and inexperience that contributes to that sort of thing. See, they understood about his stress level and the difficulty of him caring for his wife. What they were clueless about was his life after his loss. That's what I was clueless about until my wife passed away. We need to make sure that we practice pure and undefiled religion, which means we compassionately minister to people who have gone through very difficult experiences in life. I want to share with you just a thought about this passage. You'll have to look at it on your own because it's close to time for us to conclude. This is the longest passage I know of in the Bible about widowhood. I wish we had more time to deal with it, but we don't. But you can look at it on your own. Basically what that passage says is the first line of ministry to assist the widowed people is not the church. Just like the first line of ministry for children is not the church. But we have youth ministries for good reason. Parents need all the help they can get. I've already been there and done that. I raised 3 of them. They may have messed me up in the process, okay? But I was so thankful for the church and our tremendous youth ministry that all 3 of my daughters were able to experience. But it's primarily the parents' responsibility. The first line of ministry for the widowed is the families. Ministering to their parents and their grandparents, honoring them. The word there that's usually translated in our English language, honor, is in some translations translated care, caring for the widowed. You know why that we need to care? But I didn't even do that really well with my own mother because I didn't understand. I told Dad before he died, I'll make sure that Mom's taken care of. I made that promise. So because of that promise, if she needed somebody to go with her to the doctor, I was there. I lived 50 minutes away from her, but I was there. If she needed help with the finances and working all that stuff out, I was there. She obviously needed somebody to take care of her lawn. I'm borderline OCD and a recovering control freak, and so I did that, and she had the best looking lawn of anybody in the neighborhood, and I was proud of that fact. But do you know what she needed more than any of that stuff? Do you know what she needed more than any of those things? She needed me. And I didn't realize that. I was so busy doing that other stuff, some of which I could have delegated out. I could have had a 16-year-old kid do, he wouldn't have done as good as me, but I could have had a 16-year-old kid mow the yard, trim the shrubs. I was so consumed with that. One day in the rehab center, after she had an orthopedic surgery, we were sitting in her room. I'm the second of 4 boys. Okay, the thing I'm most proud of with my mother is she didn't have to go into a mental institution after trying to raise 4 boys. We were not good kids. I remember sitting there with her, and she said, after a moment of silence, she said, "I wished I would have had a daughter." My first internal reaction to that was, "Mom, what am I, chopped liver? I'm here." That was my internal reaction, but at least I was old enough to control myself at that point, and I didn't say what I was thinking inside. After a few moments of silence, I said, "Mom, I wished you'd had a daughter too." And I was sincerely saying that. I know what she meant. You women are the better gender. I mean, you can mark it down. If this is being recorded, it's public now, okay? But I've said it before. Women are the better gender, especially when it comes to relationships. They're the nurturing kind. Us guys can do it, and we can do it well, but we got to work really hard at it. And sometimes we're lazy, and we don't work hard at it. What widowed people most need is they need people. 2 of my grandkids at the retreat we had the last 2 days of July, we have an annual retreat that my family hosts in Laverne, Tennessee, between Nashville and Murfreesboro. This year we had over 90 widows from 16 different states in the country. They ranged in age from their 30s to their 90s. 2 of my granddaughters sang a song to them at our mealtime during that weekend, and it's called "People Need People." That's another thing you ought to Google. People need people. If you don't listen to the song, just Google the lyrics. That's what widowed people need most. They don't need your casserole. What they need is you. They need people. Because people need people. God does his best work through people. And that's where we can be the best help to those who've lost loved ones. especially the widowed. There's nothing like losing your spouse. Absolutely nothing. Carl D. Mills wrote a book called How to Go Shopping with Your Wife and Enjoy It. I need to get you a copy of that book. Colleen needs help, so I'll see if I can't get a copy of that book for the preacher. How to Go Shopping with Your Wife and Enjoy It. Because my wife was an avid shopper, she wasn't an avid spender, she was an avid shopper. Something about the smell of sale tags and clearance tags. But anyway, I used to claim I had more mall mileage than any man on the face of the earth. Some guys probably passed me up here in the last few years. But anyway, in that book, I want to read to you this observation he made. Because those of us who are widowed and those of us who want to minister to widowed people, we need to keep this in mind, okay? Each of us lives inside of his or her own skin. No one can get inside there with us. We all are alone inside of us, and no one knows what we're experiencing inside. The only way someone can know what we are experiencing is for us to convey a message to them, letting them know. Now, the only way that's going to happen is with relationships. You're not going to be that way to perfect strangers. What we need is cultivating transparency, closeness, intimacy in our relationships, to where we have people in our lives with whom we will be honest about our frustrations, about our needs, about our doubts, about our anger. But we've got to cultivate these relationships. You know, we can't keep being satisfied with having a level of fellowship that's nothing more than coming to a common building and singing some songs together and praying together and studying the Bible some. We've got to cultivate these relationships where we're closer and more free to share what's really going on in our life. How can I help you if I don't know that you're struggling or what you're struggling with? How can you help me unless I share with you what's going on in my life? That's my final encouragement in this session. One other, Emma, we have your pot holder to give away. I would like, Emma, come on up here, and we'll find out who wins this. Okay, what I would like to hear is the most pitiful honeymoon story here in this room. Do you have look, Brenda Donovan back there has now wait a minute, let me tell you about one in North Carolina I heard. This couple, they got hitched, and the uncle of the bride had this cabin that they could go to in southeast Ohio to spend their honeymoon. Unbeknownst to them, it had an outhouse. That was a pretty difficult honeymoon experience there that she shared with me. Can you beat an outhouse story? We spent our honeymoon in Walmart. Oh, this is good. She definitely is going to win. Emma, go around there and give that to Miss Brenda. Why, pray tell, did you spend your honeymoon in Walmart?
We thought we needed something to snack on later.
We needed something to snack on later, so we go to Walmart.
And we shopped quite a while. About an hour and a half or 2 hours.
They shopped on their wedding day. No more details? Okay. Now, if we develop a closeness in our relationship with Brenda, we might hear what Paul Harvey would call the rest of the story. And I'll bet it gets better. That's hard to believe. How long were you married? 35 years. How old were you when you got married? You were 35. You should have known what you were doing by then. Maybe that contributed to going to Walmart. You were more of a practical bride. You were more of a practical bride than a teenage bride. That is such a cute story. Oh, my. Well, there are other prizes in the golden chest of prizes that we'll give out in the third section after lunch. Again, let me remind you, and I know that you're tired. I'm a little tired too, but please please make sure you're at this third session. Like I said, of all the 6 sessions, if you could only attend one, this is the one I'd want you to come to. If you want to know what it's like, life after loss of a spouse, you'll get an earful. I really encourage you to come back. I think it'll help you a lot. So I know you'll come back on a full stomach, but you can all stand during the whole thing if you'd like to keep yourself awake. But I sure want to make sure that you come back after we eat lunch. Now also, if you know anybody who's not here, then text them, call them. If they don't experience any more with the Widowhood workshop than that session after lunch, see if you can get them here. Because I think it's, like I said, the most important, the most valuable session of all of them. Tim?
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate Dean and him being here with us this weekend. And so thankful that you're all here today for this series. And thank you, Miss Betty, for bringing this to our attention. I think this has been something we all have needed very much.
You want to explain about Miss Betty and how that all came about? You might enjoy this story.
Well, sure. Betty, how long has your husband been gone? 3 years and 2 months. Between Mother's Day and Father's Day, I did a series of lessons here on the family and the home. And towards the end of that series, Phil and I were talking. Phil is Betty's son, one of her 2 sons. And Phil and I were talking, and Phil said, you know, Miss Betty brought up the fact that in this series of the family and the home, we needed to talk about widows and widowers and dealing with loss. And in talking with the elders then, I said, you know, I'd be glad to preach on that, but I know a guy that does this, and I think this would be a great benefit to this congregation, and I think it already has, and appreciate you being here. And again, appreciate Miss Betty for bringing that to our attention. Lunch is going to be served down at our fellowship hall down the hill behind us. We would love for all of you to come and eat with us down there. I guess there's been a little change of plans. You are going to go through the line down there, and the youth are going to help take care of that with you going through the line. There's hand sanitizer, there's gloves, whatever you feel that you need to do to protect yourself going through that line to eat. And so what we're going to do at this point is have a word of prayer, give thanks for that meal, and then dismiss you to go on down there and do that, to eat. And get good and full so you can sleep through that last session. And then it is going to be on YouTube, so you don't have to worry about it. You can go back and listen to it later. So, Brother Richard, will you come and lead us in a word of prayer? Thanks for the food this afternoon, please.
Abby and Riley, would you go to the back of the auditorium, please? Abby and Riley have the notepads. If you did not get a notepad earlier at the beginning of this session, they'll be at the back of the auditorium and you can get one from them. We want to make sure that everyone has a notepad. One other thing I want to mention, there is a sweet sister in the Lord up in Meridian, Idaho, at the Linder Road Church of Christ in Meridian, Idaho, where I was the first part of June. She's a librarian, a retired librarian. She was willing to take all the information from the books out there on that display table and actually create a bibliography of recommended reading. And if you would like a copy of this, I'll leave this here on the communion table, but if you'd like a copy of this bibliography, you feel free to come up and get one of those.
Let's all pray together. Our Father and God in heaven, we're so thankful for this good day that you've made for us and given to us, and for the blessing we have this day of being here to listen to Brother Miller bring these wonderful messages and stories, all based on your word, Lord, that of your care for us in this life, and that your care extends to all those that are struggling, especially with loss of loved ones. We're thankful, Lord, that you love us and that you care for us, and that in your words you've provided instruction for us. Help us to heed this. Help us to live it out in our lives. We're thankful, Lord, for being so good to us and blessing us with so much in this life. We realize it all comes from you. Every good and perfect gift comes from you. But especially, Lord, we're thankful for your Son. And with all these blessings that we have in this life, we're thankful for life itself. We're thankful for the food that's been prepared that we're about to go and eat. We're grateful, Lord, that this has been provided for us. Bless the hands that prepared it. Bless the hands that serve it. And bless each and every one as we partake of it. Lord, we're grateful for your love. And these things we pray in the name of your precious Son and our dear Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.